Hello everyone, this is Steve Sarajian again for Passive Wrappings, bringing you another crafter here in your local community. Here in Randolph, Massachusetts, there is a potter named Ann Schunior. I'm standing outside of her workshop right now. Let's go inside, sit down and talk with her. She can tell us a bit about her work. So now we're inside the studio of potter Ann Schunior, and I'm so glad that you're able to have me here in your studio today.
Well, and welcome to the studio.
So, how long have you been a potter?
Oh, I don't tell people how long because then they realize how very old I am. Probably about 50 years.
Okay.
I started when I was about 25. I was out of school. Did not go to school for art. It was something I discovered as an adult.
Alright then, so what did you go to school for if you didn't go to school for art?
I started as a biology major. I've got a very strong biology background. And then I got very disillusioned with science for a while and became a philosophy major. And then it was very clear that wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And I did a lot of community organizing and left-wing political work. And at some point I came back to science, and at some point I discovered pottery.
So all of this by your mid-20s? Because you said you were 25 when you had started it.
Yeah, I think all of that by my mid-20s. Then I settled down a little, but I still have a sense of keeping it all with me.
So when you had gone through all that and you settled on going to the arts, what made you choose this medium over other potential mediums? There's a lot of mediums you could have worked in.
Well, the first thing is I didn't go into the arts. I became a potter. I became a craft person, and I still think of myself as a craft person and not somebody in the arts who's doing art. The first potters that I saw that I paid any attention to was when I was in North Carolina, sort of in that interim of dropping out of philosophy grad school and settling into some more community activism, that I went and saw potters in North Carolina. And these are families that are still potting in North Carolina many years later. And at that time they were probably 5th, 6th generation potters, which is very unusual for this country. We don't have that lineage of craft people. And I saw Ben Owen, who in potter's world, and people who know traditional pottery know the name Ben Owen. He was fairly elderly then. It was close to when he retired. And he seemed to reach into a mound of clay and pull out a big pot. And my basic memory was that it looked easy. And that was in North Carolina. A couple of years later I came north and was just thinking about what could I do. Just, just wanted to do something different. And took an adult course in pottery. And of course the first thing I learned was that there's nothing easy about it. And what I was seeing in his ease was accumulation of generations of potting and the fluidity you have with any medium when you've been doing it since you were maybe 10 years old and you grew up with it. So the background for my working was not from art but from craft, and I've really kept that focus.
Now I think there's an interesting distinction that you're making between the arts and crafts. How do you conceptualize those differently?
And I don't want to make a big distinction. Because the first thing people tell me is, oh, your work is beautiful, it's very artistic, which has nothing to do with anything.
What does that even mean, Exactly.
Well, right, what is any of this stuff?
Right.
That as long as people have been doing crafts, and I'm talking a millennium now, as long as people have been doing crafts, they've always decorated it. They've always taken it that extra step to add something to it beyond functionality. So it's not a question of being beautiful or not being beautiful. I think that what matters is whether you see it in art. You're making an expression of your individuality and how you're feeling about it, and about art, you say, what does it mean? You know, what did you intend it to mean? And you get into those kinds of conversations. With crafts, it's coming more out of a community setting. In traditional crafts, it's coming very much out of a community setting. For me, it's coming out of that community setting in that I am making pots for the people around me. I'm not making them to be beautiful pieces that sit in museums. It's nice when I get into exhibitions, but that's not what they're about. They're about being mugs and bowls and plates and things that people are using in their homes. And yeah, it's an expression of me, but that's not the primary thing about it. The primary thing about it is that it's a good pot, that it's a good cup, it's a good bowl, that it's a plate you want to pick up and use.
So what I'm hearing is crafts are much more community-based, more traditional, and more functional.
Functional.
Whereas art is, and not to say that the stuff that we're going to look at in a moment isn't personalized to you, but it's not based in sort of your inner experience or sort of your personal preferences. It's much more of a functional, well, I think that's why it's called craft. I really don't know if there's any other term for it, really.
Craft is a really good word. And the reason I don't get into lengthy discussions about this is as we talk, what's going to become obvious is that the pots are very much a function of me and my experience and where and how I see myself in the world. So whether I like it or not, they're very much an expression of me. And people see my pots and they know they're my pots and not somebody else's pots.
Well, let's give the viewers a bit of an idea of what we're talking about. Let's start with one of these that we have behind us. Let's start with one that I think most people can understand pretty well. It's pretty functional. The plate.
The plate.
Now, if you want to take this, since it's yours. Now,
as I look into the camera and see that you can see the plate, yes.
So let's explain a bit on a functional level what this plate is made of, how you would go about making it. What materials is this to start with?
It's clay, it's stoneware, which means it's fired fairly high. I'm firing to about 2,350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty hot. Firing that high means you can put it in the dishwasher, you can put it in the oven, you can cook in it. It's really sturdy. You can use it every day, and yeah, it's going to break if you drop it, but it can handle a lot of daily use. And these are the plates I eat off of.
You use these functionally every day?
I use these functionally every day. Now, a lot of the other pots I use nothing in my kitchen but handmade pottery. If you come to dinner at my house, everything will be served on handmade pottery. It won't all be mine. I love other people's work, and my house is full of everyone else's work from all over the world.
You're very active with different crafts from all over the world.
Yes.
And we'll get into that a little bit later, because I think that's really important. But for this one, also, what kind of paints would you use on this?
Well, they're glazes.
What kind of glazes?
They're glazes. They're fired.
I already knew when I said it that was wrong.
You knew the word. You know, it's hard to say to a non-potter what kind of glazes. Mm-hmm. This is the technical side of it.
Right.
And when I say technical, it can either be following a recipe in a book, you know, in very cookbook, add an egg and a cup of flour, except I'm adding feldspar and flint and maybe some cobalt or iron to get its color. But beyond that, glazes can get technical. And I actually don't think it's real important for most of the people out there in the world to know much about the glazes.
Now, beyond the actual materials of this, what is the style? Because we find it's going to repeat in a lot of the other work that we're going to see here. So, what inspiration are you drawing on, and what is it that you decide to go with this particular style that you're using?
Almost all of the designs I'm using, and if you look at them, they're all animals. And that's just because I like animals. It goes no deeper than that. I like animals. And almost all of them come from indigenous crafts. In this case, this is from a petroglyph in the Dominican Republic, and it's a wonderful petroglyph that's just a wall with lots and lots of, I call them wading birds, because I think that's what they're doing. That's what they look like to me. And it's just a whole wall that's covered with, I think it's maybe a dozen different birds with long legs and different shaped bodies. And it's one of those that I saw a photograph of it and said, oh yeah, that's going to go in the pots. Some of the designs are coming from pottery. The octopus is from Minoan pottery that, if I'm right, dates back probably about 3,000 years. I'm trying to think how far back the Minoans went. They were pre-Greek civilization. And they were seafaring people, and their pottery was covered with octopuses and fish and just all kinds of sea things. The oldest design I'm using, it's probably easier to see on this one, are the giraffes. And the giraffes come from African petroglyphs. They come from petroglyphs in southern Libya. And they're 7,000 years old. And 7,000 years ago, the Sahara was green like the Serengeti is now, so that the petroglyphs are all these, what we think of as large game animals. It's not nice to think of them as game animals. That's sort of defining them to be there to be killed.
They wouldn't think of themselves as game animals.
They don't think of themselves as game animals, and we shouldn't either. But yeah, big things like large cats and rhinos and giraffes and rabbits. I don't have a rabbit here, but
your inspiration draws a lot from older, more ancient works, which you're sort of bringing in here. And the animals of choice are simply based on your preference.
It's based on my preference. It's based on what makes a good silhouette. People have asked if I could do a hippopotamus. And I imagine a hippopotamus, when I see this sort of blob with blobby legs. And it's like, I can't think of any way in silhouette that this hippopotamus is really going to capture anyone's interest or imagination. Or maybe that's just saying it hasn't captured my interest and imagination. And I haven't seen a good petroglyph with a hippopotamus on it. The designs aren't all old. I don't have any examples here of one that isn't old, other than the dragonflies back here, which I simply did because, having traveled all over the world, I wanted something from the backyard. And giraffes, yeah. Dragonflies are what I see all summer, just right outside the studio door. So that seemed to be a good idea. And some of the animals come from cultures that are still creating them, still using them, living cultures, living traditions. Although there I'm really careful about whose toes I'm stepping on, and that those may not be my designs to use.
Now, do you ever, because that's an interesting point you're bringing up, and it's something which is debated among craftsmen, among artists, and among other people who are critics in those areas, around when it's appropriate to use certain symbolism. Does that, I mean, it's a debate where some people worry about it a lot, some people don't think it's an issue at all, and you seem to have some reservations.
I do.
About it.
There are designs I absolutely don't use. I use some Native American designs. I would never put a shaman on a pot. Or anyway, not a Native American shaman. Mm-hmm. I don't have an example here where I've used shamans, anyway, what I think are shamans from Uzbekistan. Shamans are religious figures. Some natives will argue that all of the symbols, all of the images on their petroglyphs, on their own artwork, are of religious significance. I have a lot of respect for that point of view. So I don't use a lot of Native American imagery. On the other hand, when I use African imagery, the response of all Africans I have ever met when they see my work is that I'm honoring their culture. They don't see it as taking away from it, but that I'm appreciating and honoring it. And as a matter of fact, some Native Americans share that point of view as well. It's not either or, cut and dried. I think for me the big thing is being aware, knowing what I'm doing, knowing how I'm using it, always being respectful, always being very clear what it is and where it came from. So if you buy a pot of mine, it will come with a card, and it will identify that this is a giraffe from southern Libya, or...
I can see inside of this one, included
it's got a card.
with the product, there's this gives information about where this actual design was inspired by.
Right. Did I put a date on it as to how old the Minoan culture is? I said 3,500 years, so that must be what it is. 3,500 years ago.
So that way people know exactly where this work in a way is coming from.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
exactly.
coming partly from you, but it's also has a long history to it that people
Yes.
need to be made aware of.
Yes.
So, one of the things you said that you would use certain shaman designs and not others. I'm sort of interested in how you make that distinction. Is it just because you feel it, for instance, Native Americans, their community would really rather that you didn't
Yeah,
in
they
general?
really would.
Is that the reason why?
Oh yeah, that's...
It's a matter of respect in that they
That's-
would ask that you not, and so that you don't.
And I absolutely respect that. On the other hand, there are some beautiful petroglyphs that I've seen in Uzbekistan, and they have two dancing figures. Clearly a man and a woman. They are wearing some kind of headgear. It's all simplified. They are clearly dancing. I'm guessing that they're shamans because these are large petroglyphs. These are almost life-size. And no one's going to go to the effort of pecking all that into a wall if these aren't important people, and that putting that imagery out there in a special location wasn't important. So my conclusion is that these are shamans doing ritual designs. And for all the people I've talked to in Uzbekistan, and I've been there a couple of times, no one is the least bit concerned that I'm treading on anyone's toes whatsoever by using these images. And it may be a matter that there's a total break with that culture. The petroglyphs were maybe done 4,000 years ago. I'm actually not clear on the date, but I think putting them at about 4,000 years ago is a good place and time for them. And there is no continuous culture from then until now that anybody's relating to and saying, hey, these are sacred images to me.
Now, this is starting to move into the area of how you are really part of an international community of craftspeople. So you started doing this when you were in your mid-20s. So when is it that you started getting to know and interacting with other craftspeople in various different parts of the world? Because I know that you've traveled quite a bit.
I didn't do much traveling till I was in my 30s, and it was well after that, before I really started relating to the crafts aspect of it. I mean, I went and I saw crafts, but I wasn't making a point of spending time with craftspeople. It was probably when I went to Ghana in, I think it was about 1998. And I was there for a month with a very small group of people, and it was with somebody who has substantial ties to Ghana and substantial ties to craftspeople, where we really spent time with people. I got to know people and meet people, and these are people, some of them, who are still friends. And I had a wonderful trip maybe 4 years ago when I went back and visited some of these people again. It was really lovely. We'd been in contact in other ways, but to go back to where they're from and meet them again was a really wonderful thing to do. So it grew out of that. It grew out of being in Ghana, where traditional culture is very alive. Not that every potter and every woodworker who's doing traditional work in Ghana isn't worried about where is the next generation coming from. This is a question raised all over the world with traditional craftspeople. But it was there. It was part of their culture. The symbolism in it, the animals in it, it is there. It's on billboards. It's on cloth. It's on absolutely everything you see. To a certain extent in Nigeria as well. And that's when I really started making the much more personal connections to the craftspeople themselves, and really got an interest in how do traditional craftspeople work, how do they function as part of their community, how is that engendered at this point, and sort of the big question that I addressed to myself is how do you encourage people to maintain their traditional crafts in a world of plastic, in a world where not only do they have exposure to the modern world, you want them, and they want to have exposure to the modern world. You want modern education. You want modern health care. You want everyone to have computers. There's no, us deciding, oh, I think you should stay in your little traditional niche and not pay any, attention to all these wonderful modern things that I like. But there's all this plastic all around, and they're being inundated with things from China, just as we're inundated with things from China. So what can anyone do to encourage traditional crafts to be a healthy, viable way to make an income? Because that's what it comes down to for everybody. No matter how much you love it, no matter how much it's important to your religion and your traditions, if you're not making any money from it, it's really hard to justify doing it. You've got to feed your family. You've got to send the kids to school.
Right.
So, what can I be doing to make it possible for them to be creative craftspeople maintaining their culture and at the same time be very much a part of the modern world?
Yeah, this is an issue of, it is hard to compete with mass production.
Yeah.
Even if sometimes that mass production doesn't produce something of quality in the same level, it's still, to ask people to pay more, a sort of living wage for these craftspeople can be a challenge. And one of the things that you had brought up earlier is when you were first moving into the crafts, you were actually learned from traditional, well, I guess we couldn't call them traditional, but from families that actually have been doing this for generations.
Well, they were traditional. They were traditional for them. I didn't actually learn from them. I just watched. I never went back down to spend any time learning from them. And one of the important things, and the community is Seagrove, North Carolina, where anybody can go, and it's a place where a lot of potters from the outside have come in. And it's a wonderful example of how tradition is a funny thing, because from the very beginning of them being discovered by a larger world, because originally they were making plates and they did well during Prohibition. They were making jugs for Prohibition. But at the same time, there were gallery owners from New York who realized how good these pots were and were introducing them to Chinese porcelain and Chinese porcelain colors and Chinese porcelain forms. So there you've got it right there. You've got these traditional people who are being exposed and loving it to a much larger world, and the work has really changed for it. And that's a process that is certainly still going on now in a good, healthy way. But still, you've got traditional potters that have been potting for, 7, 8 generations.
Now, you don't just, meet and interact and befriend these different craftspeople, but you actually are actively involved in the promotion of the work of some of them. I was actually at an event that you had last month, where you had some traditional artists, traditional potters, who were here showing us their traditional method for creating, I think it was mostly beer jugs that they were making then. It was the traditional What would they call them?
They call them beer pots.
Beer pots.
And the thing that's important about those beer pots is they're ceremonial pots. You just say to the American audience, beer pots, and they see us chugging our beer. And
I don't want to give people the wrong impression of what I mean when I say
I know.
a beer pot.
Right, that's why I'm explaining a little, because I know I will refer to them as beer pots, and it's like, what? They're actually absolutely beautiful, round, coil-built, hand-built, no wheels. I use a wheel, they don't. That are used in ceremonies, where weddings, funerals, births, and any time you have a community celebration. And beer is passed in these pots from person to person and sipped. And that general idea, I think, is in some ways the clue or the key to some of the traditional crafts being maintained. That as long as they're part of ritual celebrations within a community, you're going to keep, just for that, if nothing else, the traditional clothing, traditional textiles, traditional pottery. And because there's a need for it. Because you cannot, in that ritual of sharing beer, it's got to be clay, it's got to be from that community. There is no substitute for it. When I was in Nigeria, and where there was so much plastic around, and I was somewhere where people were buying palm wine, which it's neat. It's tapped like maple syrup from palm trees. They go out and they actually tap the palm trees, and this lightly fermented sap comes out. And people go out in canoes and collect it. Anyway, in this place, they didn't have to be in canoes, but in this location, they were going out in canoes, and there were these huge clay pots. And they were bringing it back in clay. And this was a trip in which I was really looking at plastic. I decided I wanted to take a picture in traditional communities of every place I saw plastic and how plastic was being used, and try to start making sense in my own mind about when is it clay and when is it plastic. And I finally asked a friend who is a traditional priest in Nigeria. He's Igbo. I said, why clay there? That is a place I would expect plastic. It's lighter, it doesn't break. Surely a big plastic tub is easier than a big clay pot on a canoe. And he said, if it's used for a ritual, which the palm wine is used, it's also just drunk socially, but it's used in rituals, it cannot be in plastic. It has to always be in clay. And he said, you watch the people coming to buy it. And some of them are coming on their motorbikes with jerry cans, like gasoline jerry cans. And buying the palm wine and putting it in that. And he said, if that's what they're doing, then they're just taking it home to drink. But if they're buying it for a wedding or a funeral, they're collecting it in something clay, because it has to stay in clay to keep its significance, its importance, its power, whatever it is within that culture. So that means that as long as that culture is alive, there are going to be people there, women, who can make these big, massive, beautiful pots.
This raises an interesting question. Since we have your own work sitting behind us, could you ever imagine your own work being used for those sort of ritual purposes, or do you think that's something that's too foreign to the minds of most Americans?
I made funeral urns for friends. That's as ritual as you get.
I would say that's probably about as ritual as you could get.
Yeah.
What are, turning back to these, since my attention has been turned back to them, what are some of the pieces? This one we were looking at earlier, but I kind of like more of an explanation as to the actual type of pot that this is, because it's one that I don't own any pots that are quite like this one.
Well, I mean, this was partly me just every now and then I want to make covered jars. A lot of times I don't want to make covered jars because it's a nuisance making lids. Some people like making lids. I'm not. Lids are not my thing. I would rather make a mug than a lid. I don't know. I was certainly aiming for something tall enough to put some large giraffes on. I'm sure I was thinking about that. But one of the things I was thinking about were the beads on top. And thinking about handles and not being satisfied with clay handles. And thinking, well, what if I took some beads and just ran some, this is linen cord running through it. No, it looks like this is wire running through it. Yes, this is wire running through it, so it stands up. And use some
would probably.
Yeah, it would. I think I probably tried linen and it flopped, and I thought, well, let's rethink that one. But the beads are from Ghana. They are made from recycled glass. They're made, I know the person who made the beads. I've been to his village. He also comes here to Boston once a year. So anyone can go and buy Seti's beads if they go to a cultural survival fair in December. So that's one of the other things I do is when I travel, I bring back stuff. I bring back fabric, I bring back beads, and I don't always know what I'm going to do with them. So I have lots of glass beads from Ghana. I have clay beads from Mali. I've got clay beads from Nicaragua. And I put them on pots. Sometimes I decorate pots with them. It's just something to add.
Now what about this one over here, which our viewers have not gotten a chance to look at yet?
You're going for this one?
This one, yes.
It's, well, actually, I mean, I was working on this shape at the time I was working on funeral urns, and was really thinking about that. And just, sometimes I do things just to explore shapes. That's not a shape I usually use.
Yeah, this one stood out from your work.
Yeah, sometimes I just want to go in a different direction.
This might not come up for the viewers watching this, but there's real texture to this.
Yeah, that's the only one here with the texture. I didn't think about that when I was pulling it up.
The plate has some texture as well.
Yeah, but this has a lot of carving, and I actually do a lot of carving in a lot of bowls, and that's actually what's not sitting here are all the bowls I do with all the carving.
Now you mentioned the cultural survival fairs. Now, for our viewers at home that don't know what a cultural survival fair is, would you mind giving them a bit of an explanation?
Yeah, actually, and then there's another market that's worth talking about because that's really been becoming more and more central to how I am related to craftspeople all over the place.
Yes, there is. I know which one you're talking about.
The cultural survival bazaars are put on summer and in December by a group called Cultural Survival. And their interest is in doing what they can in very serious ways to aid indigenous cultures. Right now they just got a very nice grant for promoting and supporting indigenous media. So that cultures that are really having trouble coping because, I don't know, oil companies are taking their land, destroying their rainforest, digging up where they're living, or because the pipeline in this country is going through your ancestral property. It's giving support to them, educating people about them, doing a lot of leadership training, just all kinds of things. Anybody can Google them, culturalsurvival.org. And they have 4 bazaars a year. They just had 2 of them, one in Newburyport and one in Tiverton, where people come in now from all over the world, but also a lot of local, native to the United States people, which is to say Native Americans, who are displaying and selling their work. And then in December, it's generally the 2nd and 3rd week of December, it's on their website. One's in Cambridge, one's in the Prudential Center for a weekend. And they're big marketplaces with all kinds of really good quality international crafts. They're exciting. They're fun.
So that's coming up in a few months for anybody who's watching this. So when I've actually put it up. So
December.
if you're in the area, it's something that you should definitely check out.
Yeah.
And as I put the information up there, so you can see when it's happening.
Yeah.
Now there was another event that you also wanted to talk about, which is not local.
Not local. It's
but is worth bringing up.
It's the Santa Fe International Folk Art Market. And it's probably significant that they choose to use the word art and not craft, though it's very much craft. But they're trying to build more respect and more seriousness around how fine indigenous crafts are. And generally the people displaying there end up thinking of themselves as artists. The potters here that were my guests here a couple of weeks ago from South Africa now call themselves artists. It's a very tightly juried show that has craftspeople from roughly 60 different countries around the world. It's about 150 booths, so some countries have multiple representatives there. It's clothing and textiles and other weavings as well, jewelry, metalsmithing, wood, miniature painting, felting, and things you probably couldn't even imagine. And they are the finest craftspeople from all over the world. This is museum quality work. And they're representing their cultures. This is all very traditionally based. It's all coming out of the community. Often the people there are representing large groups of the community, women's co-ops in India, big, far-ranging, extended families. There's a Tuareg silversmith, and actually he shows his work at, can I put in a plug for Native Gallery in Scituate, and the artist is El Haji, and he is a Tuareg silversmith. He lives in Niger. He has an extended family of about 60 people that is supported through this work. And he's just one of many. And I've been going since 2011. So this was probably my 8th year there. I go as a volunteer because one of the things that makes this work is having literally thousands, well, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 volunteers working in the booths, handling the money. The assumption of this marketplace is that the people coming in don't speak English, certainly don't understand or could easily handle American currency. Mm-hmm. They're probably jet lagged from flying halfway around the world. So the way life is made easier for them is in every booth there are a couple of U.S. volunteers who are helping talk to the customers, handling, writing up orders, working the cash registers, serving food, doing all the thousands of jobs that have to get done to make something like this happen. It's a huge market. It's a crazy hyper scene. People now come from all over the world to buy there. People come wanting to buy. They know that if you buy a vest or a necklace or a pot, that by buying it, you're not only getting something absolutely beautiful, but that you're supporting families and making running water or clean well water or education possible in communities that wouldn't have it otherwise. So I initially went out in 2011, it was the year after I was in Uzbekistan, to help an Uzbeki potter that I met. And I had spent a couple of days with him, and he was absolutely wonderful to me. And I said, how do I pay you back? What can I do for you? And he said, come to Santa Fe and help me in my booth. And so that's what got me out there. And I've connected with all these wonderful craftspeople that I've met from all over the world. They're there. So it's like a big gathering of the clan. Because at this point they all know each other, everybody knows each other, it's a big party. And in the course of this I've gotten to know the South African potters, Zulu potters doing very traditional work. And so I'm now mostly working in their booth, and we've become friends. They were my guests here for a couple of weeks in July. As a matter of fact, the last one just returned home, and so yeah, they've been here in this studio working, and they were joking with me because they came in and there were 3 of them, and they didn't have their tools, and they just looked around and found my clay, they found my tools, they found what they needed to find, they made them out at home, and then one of them looked at me and he said, Ann, we've colonized your studio. I thought, oh, I like that.
Now, I'm wondering, because you've traveled around a lot to get your inspiration. So, for somebody who would be starting out in this, let's say there's young people who are watching this, who are looking at these, they're interested in how they could make work like this. What would you recommend for them to really start looking at? Would it be good for them to look at different pieces of inspiration and books and things like that, because they probably don't have the capital to travel right now? Or what would you say is the approach? You
do what I did. You go to books. Do what I still do. Books, museums, and the internet. I mean, you can Google anything. People are welcome to find me on Facebook. I tell everyone, I put virtually the most personal I get on my Facebook page are what animals I see outside the door walking by as I work. No cat videos on my Facebook page. I'm talking about my own work and all the people around the world that have inspired me. And if you start looking at it, what you'll find is you'll start through the comments and all of a sudden they're all in Russian. Right now I go through the comments and they're in Zulu, because all these, they have Facebook pages too, and we're all going back and forth, and from that you just start Googling things like crazy, and you know, for better or for worse, the world is at our fingertips, and you just have to look for it. It's there.
Now, you've done some teaching yourself, haven't you?
I do a little teaching, yeah.
I know it's not primarily what you do, but you've done some. And what is it that students usually, when they come to you, what is it they really want to be able to do? What is it they're coming to you to learn how to do pottery, and what sort of motivates them to do a craft which, by your own definition, well, you brought up earlier, is really having to compete right now with sort of the forces of modernization. But you still have people coming to you who are interested in learning these sort of things, and that's interesting to me.
At this point, my students have all been kids. I've had folks that have started out with me when they were about 9 or 10, who are now the oldest in the group are 15. And I'm pretty unstructured about how I teach. In the beginning, when somebody comes in new, I'm really concerned that they learn different techniques, that they take seriously coil building, slab building. And it's only after they've done that that I'll let them go to the wheel, because the wheel is actually harder to get started in and easier to get discouraged in when it doesn't go well. And in the beginning, I don't want kids to get easily discouraged. After they've been at it a little while, then I want them to have the challenge and to, you know, to have some failure. I mean, that's how we're all challenged and learn and grow, by the things that don't come easy, that fail.
It's interesting you bring that up, because my last guest, when we were talking, she talked about a lot of her anxieties around failure and working in design. And I think that that's something that a lot of young students, maybe if they start off young enough, like some of your students are, it's not as big of an issue. But some people can get really apprehensive about failing, and it's you're not going to get anywhere if that becomes your general apprehension, is what I found.
I agree. And you ask why do people come here, and I think I don't think everyone comes because they want to make pots, or maybe they think they want to make pots. I think it's more because I try to make this an interesting place to be, and we'll talk about pots, and we'll get out pictures, we'll get out whatever pot I've just bought or whatever I'm excited about that on a given day, and talk about it. And the question I will pose to them is, what in this might inspire you? Not to copy it, but is there something in it? Is there something in the colors? Is there something in the texture, in the shape? Is there something in it that pulls you in, that you want to take and put into something of your own? And then from there, things are pretty freeform here, and we'll sit around talking about what movies are they watching, what books have we read, what do we think of politics. I always ask them if they voted. They always laugh. I said, no, this is important to talk about. To get people thinking about, you gotta vote. When I was a kid, I went with my mother when she went to vote. And maybe this comes back to my community activism side, that I still, when I'm around anybody, that there's that sense of my own social awareness of what's going on. And other times it's what's in the yard, and that the groundhog, that I've got the fattest groundhog in the universe here this year. Or, a monarch butterfly chrysalis, which is one of those beautiful things in the entire universe. They're green with gold dots on them. There's no work of art any more beautiful than a monarch chrysalis. So nobody who comes here has their head buried in clay. We're talking about a larger world and addressing a larger world and having fun.
I think that's an important thing that people could take away. One might ask, someone could be watching this and they would ask, why is it that you've talked so much about other artists during this interview? And I think part of the reason is because there's no way to really understand your work without looking at that larger context in which you're drawing inspiration, in which you're interacting with people.
That's true.
And I want to draw because people haven't gotten...
Yeah, we can talk about these, because this is a whole other thing.
Now, this one draws on the birds, again, one of your favorite subjects here.
So this piece is Sagar fired, and this is a technique that for me is a huge challenge. I think for everyone who does Sagar firing, it's a huge challenge and has a very high failure rate. There is no glaze on the outside of this pot. I do glaze the inside of it. This is another one, and actually this one has some surprises inside it for us, which is very nice. We'll talk about them. So the white and brown are two colors of clay, and this is something I do a lot. I probably have 4 kinds of clay of different colors here in the studio. I've got a medium brown, I've got a dark brown, I've got a white. Actually, I've got a couple of shades of white. And then I layer them. And a lot of what I'm doing has to do with layering clays. So that even in a piece like this, I'm working with 2 colors of clay. I've got, the pot is made in a light clay, and the spiral and the animal is an overlay. It's done like a template. It's sort of backwards from stencils. But the animal, and then one glaze is going over the whole thing. So here I'm really playing with colors of clay. But instead of putting a glaze on it, I'm putting it in a box that is packed really tightly with iris leaves. And wherever the iris leaves touch, you get the lines. These lines are nothing but the mineral from the iris. This pot had a lot more of it, and looking at the colors, I suspect I used a little, yeah, this is from a little seaweed in it. And this one, instead of being put in its own box, was wrapped up very tightly, cocooned, in layers and layers of newspaper, and it's called clay slip, which is just a liquidy clay. And it's layers and layers and layers, and it's really built up like a cocoon or a mummy, and then left to dry. And then of course what happens is after it's fired, all that newspaper is burned away, leaving all these wafer thin layers of clay that was between the newspaper. And sometimes on it you can still see places, this one's cleaned up pretty good, where it's still sticking and it goes through a lot of rubbing and cleaning to get all that off. I like doing this because part of my aim was to get away from shiny surfaces. For if you're eating off of something and you're cooking, you want a shiny surface. You've got to have something that you can wash, that's easy to clean, that's going to be hygienic. But in all of these pieces, I'm trying to get that look of a petroglyph, of the surface, that rock surface. And that means not glazed. So then you've got the question of what do you do to make it interesting? And I've known about Sagar firing, and part of the reason I started doing it is because I can do it in the bottom shelf of my kiln where it was just too cool for all my glazes, so I was trying to think, how do I use the bottom of the kiln? Because you can't waste space in a kiln. It's much too expensive to fire a kiln to have any area that's empty. And so I started trying the Sagars in it, and they fire beautifully at the slightly lower temperature. And they give me a surface that really does look like a rock face and petroglyphs. Now the problem with this is there's so much happenstance in it.
Is that a problem?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Okay.
To a certain extent, it's a problem. There's always happenstance. I would say at this point, and I'm doing pretty well, that 50% of the pieces come out good. 50% of the pieces are pieces that I want to take to galleries, I want to be selling, that I can put a good price on, that people are going to love it. About 25% of the pieces are okay. They're not spectacular, they're okay. They'll probably find a home. And about 25% of the pieces, I think they're ugly. They're either so very dark that they just, there's no life in them. And when they get dark, the animals are all covered, and so that sort of loses the point of the whole thing.
So this method lacks some level of efficiency.
Oh, yeah. But the elements of surprise is really nice. I mean, the fun of opening the kiln and taking out all these containers, and particularly opening these cocoon things that they just go crunch in your hands, and all of these wafers of clay fall away, and you've got a pot. It's very exciting. More exciting when they turn out well. I'm now playing with the idea that some of them can get refired. So if they haven't gotten enough of the leaves, packing them again, firing them again. So that I'm getting something out of it. And I've got to figure out whether the ones that are too dark can get refired with nothing, just put in the kiln and refired, what will happen there. That gets expensive to do, because my most expensive step is firing. If the energy costs are, surprise world, sky high. It costs a lot to fill my propane tank, which is what I fire the kiln with. So that if a pot, to be successful, has to be fired twice, that's really increasing my production cost. And sometimes it's worth doing it. If I've got a good pot, and I really like the pot, it might be worth it to me to refire it. And sometimes, because then you're again layering, it's more layering, because you've got the first firing and you've got the second firing. Sometimes you get more interesting things, and you get just more variations and more richness in it. But who knows? this is the kiln. And it's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but it does the job for me. And it's, even opening it, it's hard to imagine, oh, I've got something extra in it. This piece isn't normally in it. That's in it because it's going to get some repair work, and while it's being repaired, this piece is going to hold up the arch. And when it's being fired, it's got 2 rows of shelves in it. There's a row of shelves behind that go up, 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 full of pots, and then another row of shelves in front of it. Kilns are basically pretty simple things. It's fired with propane, and on the side, it's got 4 burners, 2 on each side. That's where the flame comes in. So the flame is coming in right here and is shooting into the kiln. And it takes a little over 12 hours to fire it. What you do is you heat it up to its peak temperature, and then you completely seal it off. And it takes about 12 hours to fire and 2 days to cool. And after 2 days of cooling, it will be down to about 450 degrees, and I can open it up and start taking pieces out.
All right, so it's been great to have me here today.
Fun.
You know, it's been a lot of fun talking about you know, your experience with other artists and the work that you've done here. So, are there any statements that maybe you haven't gotten to make that you'd like to leave our viewers with before you go?
I don't know. I mean, I would encourage anyone to try to do any craft. I think that it's always important to be doing hands-on things, to be getting your hands dirty. I think about pottery is you get your hands dirty, which is one of the things I like about it. If you don't like getting your hands dirty, you should become a weaver. But that I think it's good for everyone to have that sense of creating something themselves and trying to just get that feel of what it's about. And there are lots of places where you can take pottery courses or photography courses or whatever it is that you yourself are actively creating something.
So if people want to see more of your work, they should go to your website, which is? Ann'sPottery.com. All right, well, thank you, Ann, and everybody can take a look at that site.
Yeah.
Well, that was it for Passive Wrappings. I want to thank Ann and Randolph Community Television for helping me bring this work to you today. If you're on YouTube, you can go ahead and give it a like if you liked it. If you didn't like it, then hit the like, and you can share it. And if you're watching this on television, just yell at me on the street. Tell me what your opinion was. So, for Randolph Community Television, this is Steve Sarazian. This is Passive Wrappings. You can find me at fireandtheminddesign.com, and you can email me at contact@fireandtheminddesign.com with any comments that you might have. Thank you, and I'll see you again next time.